Elden Ring is probably one of the largest games ever made. I don't think there's any debating that. It is such a large game. And with that being said, there's probably going to be a bunch of issues in terms of it not being finished completely. Going to be a bunch of balancing issues as well, which is completely forgivable because it is a large game. There's added so many different mechanics and things like that that they're going to miss some things. But where my issue actually comes in is that the game's been out for over a year now, and there's plenty of things that they have yet to address, which is very upsetting because there's plenty of modders out there that actually change up the quality of life in the game and add new things, and the developers themselves kind of been slacking a little bit. I know a lot is actually riding on this DLC, and I did actually make a separate video talking about things I actually would like to get added or changed about the game itself in the DLC. Definitely check that video out, by the way. But yes, this video is going to talk about the top 10 things that Elden Ring did get wrong. Now, this is going to be in no particular order. Just want to talk about the things that I actually would like to eventually get changed. Maybe, probably not going to happen, but I just want to talk about it anyway because it makes for a nice conversation. Anyway, that out of the way, let's get into the video. Now, starting off, I want to talk about the upgrade system as it pertains to the smithing stones and the somber stones. Now, starting off, there's just no way to get an infinite amount of ancient dragon stones. I don't know why it's such a broken thing to just have plenty of max weapons. The difference between plus 24 and plus 25 is not that big of a difference. Like every single game, they have to stop us from getting a whole bunch of max weapons for whatever reason. I don't really know why. But the worst thing about the upgrade system is that the smithing stones are just way more annoying and way more obnoxious of a path than the somber stones. Now, the somber stones, if you have a somber weapon, you can literally get a plus 10 weapon with only killing probably 2 bosses. Just 2 bosses. If you want to actually max out your smithing stone weapon, the earliest you could probably get it would be like the Consecrated Snowfield or Farum Azula, which is like toward the end of the game. And with that being said, you need 97 smithing stones to upgrade your weapon to max. With a somber weapon, you only need 10. You only need 10. So if you actually to buy those from the store with the bell bearings, it's 120,000 for the smithing stones, 97 for the somber stones. If you wanted to upgrade it via the blacksmith, it would cost 21,000 roughly. I'd tested it out with straight swords. 21,000 for a smithing stone upgrade and 10,000 for a somber stone upgrade. Now, this would be perfectly fine if the smithing stones were more accessible, which they're absolutely not. They're scattered all over the place. There'll be plenty of times you got to pick up a smithing stone and it only gives you 1. I don't understand why they only give you 1 at a time. Sometimes they should at least drop in groups of 3. Now, the reason why the smithing stone upgrade system is just more expensive is because you can infuse these weapons, well, except for some of them, but when you can infuse them, that means you have a lot more variety. You can put any type of weapon skill on these weapons themselves, which is obviously a really nice concept. However, the best weapons in the game tend to just be somber weapons, so I don't understand why the somber weapons are cheaper, more accessible, and they just tend to be the better alternatives anyway. That doesn't really make much sense to me. The way to fix this is definitely to just only have a plus 15 cap, or just like half the smithing stone requirements themselves. It probably end up being a lot better. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the scalings. I hate the scalings in every single Souls games because of the letters. I don't understand why we just don't switch to the numbers, because letters are just so vague, because every single like C scaling or B scaling is just different than the next C scaling or B scaling. I'll give you a couple examples. There's plenty of examples in the game, but I'll give you 2. The Regalia of Ochad, it has a C scaling in both Arcane and Dexterity, but it actually scales much better of Arcane. Look at the Magma Blade, it gets a D scaling in Dexterity, but a C scaling in Faith, but it scales better off Dexterity, which is also pretty stupid. And another thing I don't like is when weapons actually scale off a particular stat, like the Family Head's Ashavor scales with Intelligence, gets a D scaling in Intelligence. That's annoying. The Envoy's Greathorn, its Ashavor scales with Faith, gets a D scaling in Faith. You look at like Sleep, the Sleep mechanic. The Sleep Sword scales with Intelligence, the Torch scales with Faith, and the Sleep Pot scales with Arcane. What? And then there's a problem of weapons having these high requirements that don't even scale well in that particular stat, like the Golden Order Greatsword getting a 21 Dexterity requirement but gets a D scaling in Dexterity, and like someone like the Gargoyle's Black Halberd gets a 22 Faith requirement but gets a D scaling in Faith. That doesn't make much sense. And there's other weapons that look like they should have a very high requirement in a certain area and they just don't. Something like the Axe of Godfrey, you'd think that would have like an A scaling or an S scaling in strength, but it only gets a C scaling in strength. So there's like plenty of issues throughout the entire weapons, which like there are like 250 weapons, so there's going to be issues in terms of its scalings. But the fact that these things haven't been changed over time is very upsetting. Now, next up, I want to talk about crafting. Now, crafting does house plenty of amazing items that you can grab. Pretty much everything that you used to get in the previous Souls games in terms of their merchants, you can pretty much get in the crafting system, which is great because it's portable. So you can just like ride around and actually just craft a bunch of stuff on the go, which is nice if you could use it in combat, which you cannot, which is very silly. Now, this actually wouldn't be too bad if the crafting system was intuitive, which it really is not. It requires so many materials to farm, which is really annoying because these options are really seen as secondary to your build. So I don't understand why they're just not more accessible. A really good system would be to just have spend a certain amount of materials to unlock them, and afterwards we could just like infinitely buy them with runes and all crafting materials themselves, which would be a really nice change because it would actually stop us from having to craft and farm forever and ever, especially for things like the Trina Lilies, which are just completely obnoxious to farm. But definitely the worst thing about the crafting system is the cookbooks. There's like 60 cookbooks in this game and not a single one actually needs to exist. It's ridiculous. Like the whole purpose of a cookbook, I guess, is that you have certain types of items just locked behind certain types of areas and regions, which doesn't make much sense because the materials themselves are locked behind certain types of areas and regions. Like every single recipe should actually be unlocked at the very beginning of the game. At the very least, just have these recipes be unlocked when you pick up the map or probably like go to a new area for the first time and then actually unlock these recipes, because they should not be tied to cookbooks, because there's plenty of times we just miss a cookbook because like there's 60 in the game. There's a good chance that you just miss a few. And if you just miss a few, you just don't have certain types of items that you can craft. So yeah, it's just a very silly mechanic. Next up, holy damage. Now, it wouldn't be a Yui video if I wasn't talking about how bad holy damage is. Been doing it for like over a year now, and I'm going to continue to do it until they fix it, because yeah, as you can probably tell by the chart on screen, there's plenty of bosses that are resistant to holy, which I don't care what the reasoning is. I guess the reasoning is because they're all related to Marika and Radagon as to why they have to be resistant to holy, which still doesn't make any sense. I don't know why. Because they do holy damage, they have to be resistant to holy damage. Why doesn't that logic apply to us? Not really too sure. It's a stupid mechanic. They should actually fix that. And there's actually plenty of enemies that are actually resistant to holy themselves as well, when you actually look at the regular mini bosses and enemies list. Even looking at the list of enemies that are weak to certain damage types, holy is just going to rank lower on that one as well. Thankfully, the weapon options are really good. Spell options cannot say the same thing. Definitely the lowest on the list compared to all of the other elemental spells. But yeah, the worst thing about it is because holy is just a new damage type in the series. Hasn't been in any other game. Finally a thing in Elden Ring. Was looking forward to it, and it just ended up being like this. So yeah, very upsetting. Now, next up, I want to talk about boss attacks. Now, specifically, I want to talk about unpunishable boss attacks and delayed attacks. Now, starting off with the unpunishable boss attacks, it's one thing to have to dodge an attack for like 10 to 15 whole seconds. Like, that's not too bad, but it's another thing to not really get much of a reward out of that. Because there'll be plenty of times where like you have to dodge for like 10 to 15 whole seconds and like this insane combo, and you don't get much of an opening to actually like punish those bosses' attacks themselves. Which is weird because it makes a lot of the easier attacks to dodge just have more openings than the harder attacks to dodge. Someone like Millennia, for example, her Waterfowl Dance and her Phantom attack, they give you such a little opening, and there's like attacks that are 10 times as easy to dodge that will just have a lot longer of an opening and get like a whole charged heavy attack off, which is just weird. It actually makes all of these fights just very RNG heavy, which is definitely not a good thing, because you look at previous Souls games in terms of their boss fights, like someone like Medea. He did like his entire giant laser attack that you had to like dodge for about 10 whole seconds. Very risky because it could definitely one-shot combo you. And after you successfully dodge the entire thing, you're rewarded with like wailing on his head for like 10 whole seconds. And alternatively, you look at someone like Placid Dusax that has a very similar attack. And after you successfully dodge the entire thing, you are rewarded with a teleport. He just teleports away. So it's like these types of same concepts that they had in the previous Souls games. You know, the harder attacks that you dodged, the more you actually got rewarded. Now that whole concept is just kind of gone, which is very unfortunate. As for the delayed attacks though, it can be fine in moderation. I don't mind delayed attacks, but in this game, they just spam them so often, and these delayed attacks just last forever in terms of their animations. Now, the whole purpose of a delayed attack is to stop you from roll spamming and actually punish that behavior as well, which is fine, but in this game, it's not even just that, it goes like a whole step further. It's pretty much to the point where you just have to predict when it's going to land, which is annoying because these attacks are just not telegraphed at all. You might as well just do them with your eyes closed. You probably actually have a better chance of dodging it that way, but it just ruins the entire flow of the fight. People would just much rather, I know myself definitely would much rather just memorize combos and movesets and dodge those instead of trying to memorize delayed attacks, because it just feels like it doesn't really fit in the whole fight itself when these bosses just take forever to swing and then swing fast at the last second. It's like, it feels pretty cheesy. It's not really that fun. Don't really like it. Okay, for number 6, I want to talk about the game after Morgott. Now, I pretty much talked about this in my top 5 worst areas in the game, so I'm not going to really go too deep into it, so definitely check that video out if you want to know more of my opinions on this. But basically, after Morgott, the game takes a massive nosedive. Like, the areas afterwards are just, like, very empty, doesn't really offer much exploration or value in trying to, like, just go through the areas at all, or even killing the enemies, because they're all pretty, like, overpowered at that point, because they all do a lot of damage, have a lot of health, not really that fun to navigate as well. And it's just a bunch of reskinned enemies and bosses as well. Going through the mountaintops of the giants is pretty much the exact same thing as going through most of the early game areas, except this time the enemies are just white. going through Morgotts Palace, the enemies are pretty much the exact same, except this time they're just red. So like just slight little reskinned and differences in certain areas. Even like the level designs themselves kind of fall off a little bit. And like the bosses are just not that great after Morgott. Fire Giant, Godskin Duo, do not really care for them at all. Thankfully, the game picks it back up after Malekith and onwards, which is great. But yeah, that whole area in between Morgott, which is pretty much like the pinnacle of the game. You just finally reach the Earth Tree. It's such a great experience. And then afterwards, you just have these empty areas that are just not fun to explore and don't really have much fun bosses as well. Now, next, I want to talk about the lack of weapon skills and Ash of War options for like these unique weapons. I know everybody can think of one weapon out there that can not be infused and just does not have a unique weapon skill. Probably the biggest offender of this is the Dragon Greatclaw. It just gets stuck with Endure. The game's been out for over a year. I don't know why they just did not implement just any type of weapon skill, any type of red lightning effect for its weapon skill at all. That's really annoying. Other offenders, all the crystal weapons, every single crystal weapon should just get a unique skill. Every single black gargoyle weapon as well. I don't know why they just don't get a unique skill for Destined Death. That doesn't really make much sense. Something like the Rotten Staff, it gets stuck with Erd Tree Slam. I don't know why it doesn't get like a Rotten Erd Tree Slam. That would be really cool as well. So there's a bunch of little things here and there like that. Other weapons that actually can be infused, like the whips, their Ash of War options are just terrible. They don't get a single unique Ash of War that actually can hit with the weapon itself. That's really annoying. Something like the flails, Spinning Chain is not an equipable Ash of War. It's just a regular weapon skill that comes default on the flails, but you can't infuse it onto it. That's really annoying. I don't know why they just didn't implement that into the game. It's been out for over a year now. Please, From Software, that'd be really nice. Okay, let's talk about the drop rates. So I'm a person that plays on PC, so it doesn't really affect me because I can just use Cheat Engine, but I'm still going to talk about it anyway because it's annoying. The drop rates are so bad. So there are 66 weapons in this game that you can farm for, and of those 66, only 3 have a drop rate higher than 5%. That is an absolute joke. This is just a regular open world RPG. It's not an MMO, so I don't understand the thought process of having us just farm forever for these weapons. So if you're a completionist, a big fuck you, I guess, because you're just not going to have a great time. There are 250 weapons in this game. I don't understand the concept of just having a bunch of weapons that have such an incredibly low drop rates. Like some of these things have like a 0.5% drop rate. What's the purpose of that? Like it's already a 100-hour game. Why did they have to extend it further for people that just want to grind out certain types of weapons? Don't really understand that concept. And it's one thing for weapons, okay? But for shields and armor sets as well? What? Why does you have to farm for armor sets, which mean like barely anything to begin with? Like you pretty much just use them for fashion. Why is grinding out armor sets the exact same type of tedious task? I don't get it. Nothing in this game should have anything less than a 10% drop rate. Anything less. There are so many things in this game. Like you don't have to spend so much time for this stuff. It's a joke. I don't like it at all. Should not be a thing. Number 9, I want to talk about the Great Runes. Now, half of the Great Runes in this game are just kind of mid. They don't really offer much benefit. They're kind of useless, which is fine in terms of balancing, but you can't simultaneously have it to where they're very hard to activate at the same time, because the only way to activate the Great Runes is to use Rune Arcs, and Rune Arcs are only have like a finite amount in the game. You can't really buy an infinite amount or have a reliable way to get an infinite amount of Rune Arcs as well. And then you create this situation where you have a bunch of these people saving their Rune Arcs for important situations, and the next thing you know, you beat the game, and then for New Game Plus, you're not going to really bother going to get the Great Runes anyway because they require going all the way up these giant towers, which is just a waste of time. So you're not going to really bother to get them in New Game Plus as well. But the reason as to why I'm a bit more annoyed lately is because the Convergence mod just came out to where it has changed up the entire game, and the Great Runes had a really nice change as well, to where every single Great Rune offered a 10% flat buff to your HP and an additional buff as well. Increases total HP by 20%, increases total HP by 10%, and increases endurance by 5, HP by 10 and mind by 5. 10 and adds HP regen? Add HP on hit? Which, like, depending on your build, you actually go with a certain type of one, which is a really cool concept. And every single time you killed a boss, it activated your Great Rune. Doesn't matter if it was like a mini boss or like an actual main boss. After you killed it, it just activated the Great Rune, which is such a great concept because that idea was literally in Dark Souls 3 as the Ember form. When you killed a boss, you just got embered again, which is like, they've already done that concept. I don't know why they just didn't bring it back to this one. That'd be a cool and nice change. Please add it to the DLC from Software. Now for the last thing, what I want to talk about is the NPC quest lines. Now this is probably the most outdated and unintuitive form of storytelling ever. Like every single Souls game has to have it, and they just haven't changed up the formula in Elden Ring, and I just don't know why. I don't understand. Like the difficulty of the game should be in the combat, not in trying to figure out where the random ass NPC fucking teleported to. Please, From Software. My first playthrough of the game, I really tried to complete a couple of quest lines. I really tried super duper hard. I finished the game with like well over 100 hours of playtime, figured out how to go to like the Volcano Manor, the Consecrated Snowfield, beat Millennia, literally went to certain hidden underground areas, and I didn't complete a single quest line. It's so annoying. You have to try and figure out where they actually end up teleporting to, and if they did teleport and you might have like accidentally skipped a line of dialogue, you just didn't really get their clue as to where the fuck they were going, and you had to pick up a random item that's in the middle of nowhere, then return it to them, then they teleport again, and then half the time they just give you a bunch of this jack shit and nothing really good at all. Like most of the time you actually get something good is when you kill the NPC, but you can't kill them throughout any point of the questline. You have to kill them throughout certain points of the questline to really benefit off it. I remember I was playing the Lies of P demo. I definitely played that if you haven't already, because it's actually pretty decent. But there was actually a point where I was talking to an NPC, and later in the playthrough, I actually picked up an item that was for them, and then someone communicated me via like the intercom or like the radio, or communicating via magic, whatever the fuck it was, and they were telling me to go back to the NPC because that item is actually for them. I was like, wow, that's a really cool interaction. That's a really cool way to actually get me involved into the storytelling and the NPC questline itself. It is something that I wish FromSoft actually did more of, is just have someone just communicate with you throughout your playthrough, whether you're just like riding through the area or something like that. I know it's something that actually might end up doing in Armored Core because you have people talking to you throughout the mission, but basically I just want some more type of budget put into the NPC questlines themselves, because the NPC questlines have some of the best storytelling and points of lore throughout the entire game. And there's not much of a budget behind it to really make sure that it's intuitive and have like even the most casual of players be able to complete an NPC questline as well. And potentially probably just have more cutscenes for these NPC questlines to get me more invested in them. That would actually be really nice. But basically, I'm just sick of this having to complete my playthrough and then go to YouTube and find out what happened to this character and their story and be like, wow, that was actually kind of sad. I just wish that I experienced it firsthand. That would be really cool. Maybe one of these days From Software will create an easy to navigate NPC questline, but yeah, today is not one of those days. But yeah, that pretty much concludes it for this one. There are like obviously a bunch of other things that are wrong with the game itself, but there's a bunch of like nitpicking stuff. So if you do want me to make like a nitpicking list, I can do that. Or if you actually want me to talk about the top 10 things that Elden Ring did get right, I can make that video as well. Just let me know down in the comments. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please do like and subscribe, and do follow me on Twitch because I should be live by the time this video is out. Probably doing a challenge run as well. But yeah, see you next one, guys. Bye.